Part 4, Accessing the King Within. Chapter 8, Historical Patterns of Accessing the King. Sacred kingship, in its literal historic forms as well as in its modern equivalents, can be a mixed blessing. Societies that have a single individual embodying the archetypal king are at their inception exceedingly stable and creative. Since only one man's ego really matters, the clash of competing egos is minimized. Everyone knows his place in the pecking order. As long as the pecking order isn't overly oppressive, these societal systems allow individual efforts to be directed towards transpersonal rather than egoistic goals. Sacred kingship are most creatively successful in their early phases, because a new king often brings to a society law and order, safety from external threat, and relative freedom from want. He establishes also the necessary material and psychological conditions for cultural advance. And in a new society, as with any structure yet to be rigidified, individuals are in a unique position to make significant contributions to the culture. Since advances in any field are made primarily by individuals, albeit in a supportive context, and individuals in sacred kingship are relatively unencumbered by egoistic competition, these first ancient monarchies were historically the most creative societies known to humankind before the modern era. Perhaps also the archetypal basis of kingship provides people a psychospiritual anchor for individual and collective aspirations. The king becomes a basis for his people's projection of what the incarnated self might be like. Outside of kingship, the common man can find it difficult to know what is expected of him. With the king's image in mind, he has a very concrete idea of what he needs to do to actualize himself. At first, this kind of projection provides security and comfort. From a solid base, people gain a certain freedom from chaos, enabling them to be for a time joyfully creative. The downside of this is that a large-scale projection of the archetypal king onto a single person eventually robs people of their individuality. At first, people are thrilled by the security, but finally they are afraid to change anything that might threaten that security. Creativity is nothing if not change. In Egypt, after an initial burst of creativity in engineering, mathematics, theology, literature, and the arts, artistic canons became rigid and few novel scientific or philosophical achievements emerged. Culture remained more or less static thereafter for 3,000 years. The same is true of other ancient kingship societies from the Maya to the Chinese. The initial inspiration of large-scale projection turns into passivity of abdication, preparing the tyrant's way. Mircea Eliade has noted the pervasive fear of history and individual responsibility to be found in tradition-bound societies. The vast majority of people regard themselves as essentially slaves of the gods, as in Mesopotamia, of god-men, as in Egypt, or of a particular tyrant, as in so many modern societies. This leads to a kind of collective kindergarten atmosphere, in which the divine or semi-divine enslaver is expected to make all the decisions about what to do and how to do it. With a loss of initiative and personal identity, there is no possibility of attaining maturity. Authentic maturity requires introspection and self-adopted responsibility. Where individuals project their king onto their ruler, they lose access to the corresponding collective aspects of their own psyches. This in turn restricts the collective consciousness available to a society and guarantees that society will never mature. Despite our innate longing, a single leader cannot be generative when his people abdicate their own selves, and instead of inspiring people to develop themselves, most historical leaders have done the opposite, facing the power vacuum left by an abdicated populace. Leaders have tended benevolently, or not to try to control more and more of the details of living, assuming if they don't, nobody will. Hitler's staff generals were often irritated by how little he left them to do. Russia's Tsar was responsible for every tiny bureaucratic decision involved in governing his nations of millions. No government official under him had authority to make decisions. Their only real and easily corruptible power lay in suggesting or blocking an audience with the Tsar. By refusing to own the power of our inner king, history shows we eased the way for the brutal repression of dissent, the establishment of inflexible cultural and religious canons, and the pursuit of devastating wars of national conquest. Whole civilizations have been undermined as a consequence. An abdicated populace enables the usurping few to subject any human being they may choose to unequal opportunity, unjust imprisonment, dislocation, unemployment, torture, rape, and whole populations to genocide. Rituals of initiation can be an important psychological aid to maturity. However, it is often true that kingship societies use rites of passage to encourage conformity to an impersonal ideal of manhood. There is no encouragement offered a man toward his development of personal masculine identity. There toward is only development of a personal masculine identity. There is only a commitment to an impersonal other who takes little or no account of individual egos. Where personal psychological growth is curtailed, no generative man can emerge. Conformity, because it limits maturation, leads to cultural stagnation. Egyptian scribes and artists were subjected to extended periods of apprenticeship. Rote memorization of traditional theories and techniques was believed to be the only method of tapping into Ma'at. Innovation and experimentation were condemned as the chaotic way of Set. Initially profound insights into the meaning of human life were catalogued and passed along as cliched moralistic aphorisms. Despite all the negative consequences of sacred kingship, a breakdown of these systems was equally disastrous. As we look around our contemporary societies, we see striking parallels to the conditions ancients associated with these breakdowns. We heard the lament of one such ancient, the Egyptian Nafaru, quoted in chapter 4, during the long interregnum his chronicle describes. To some degree, we still seem to need to project our inner king upon our leaders. To what extent are we aware of our inner lives even now? We might ask ourselves whether we have, as abdicators or usurpers, in our own relationships with others. What are the chaos and violence we see in the world around us? Are we currently living through an extended collective psychological interregnum between the institution of sacred kingship and the internalization by every man of the archetype of the king? Democracy and the internalization of the king. In a world in which the great masses of men more or less abdicated their inner thrones and responsibilities, one lone city remembered a more ancient way of life. In the Athens of the late 6th century BC, the rule of the people was reinvented. At that time, Athenia democratic suffrage was limited to free male citizens. This consciously or unconsciously reflected a tribal past in which adult males held collective masculine power. In effect, these men shared the archetypal king among themselves. Anthropology and archaeology suggest that most pre-literate and early urban peoples were more or less democratic in this way. We can be sure whether the distant ancestors of the Dorian Greeks were, but it would seem likely. In North American Indian culture, and in Africa among the Rain Kings, leaders ruled in concert with a council of male elders. The Hebrews, to a lesser extent other Semite and Indo-Aryan tribes, were able to dissociate the king from the king archetype. But the Athenians were the first recorded civilization to radically internalize the archetype and to dispense with the king altogether. Of course, there was none of the conscious internalization modern depth psychology encourages. But Greek philosophical developments resulted in a widespread realization that gods are, in part, projections of the psyche, and that ultimately what fuels the projections is the god energy within the psyche. Pre-Socratic philosophers transformed gods into natural laws and processes, including psychological ones, which were expressions of a supreme deity. As Plato reconstructed the dialogues and speeches of Socrates, Socrates believed in a king god, and he spoke of daemons, entities that could be found both within the psyche and in the outer world, in which the various levels of cosmic reality. Hermetic and Gnostic traditions in the latter Hellenistic age elaborated upon the idea of an internalized god. The birth of democracy in Athens went hand in hand with these philosophical speculations. This is not to say that for Greeks Zeus or other deity constructs ceased to exist as gods in the external world. Rather, the Greeks realized that the inner and outer worlds may be the same reality viewed from opposite perspectives. Furthermore, the human ego was never identified with the indwelling God. Socrates was quite clear that he served an inner spirit, one that prompted him to give up the life of the ego for the pursuit of truth. The Gnostics believed the God they contacted dwelt in the pleroma, a region strikingly similar to the modern conception of the unconscious. At the same time, they experienced themselves as sacred vessels containing this God. Thus, the king god was both other and within. A parallel development took place among the Jews of the Roman Empire. If we take the Gospels to be a metaphorical history, we see the man Jesus taking the role of sacred king upon himself. He proclaimed himself the Son of King God. He is reported to have had magical power over nature. He allowed himself to be thought of as a messianic savior, come from heaven to restore the essence of the Torah. He even sacrificed his life to bring the world into harmony with the sacred order of the kingdom of God. Jesus exhibited in his life and teachings a paradigm of the ego-archetypal axis when he said, "If you knew me, you would know my Father also." He might have been implying an ego-archetypal merger, but he also said, "I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me," which disidentified his ego from the archetype. The message of the Garden of Gethsemane story is that he had a human ego struggling to face its imminent death, but that he was also a vessel filled with divinity. Where the kingdom of God is, presumably God is as well. Jesus said unequivocally, "The kingdom of God is not coming with signs to be observed, nor will they say, 'Lo, here it is,' or 'There,' for behold, the kingdom of God is in the midst of you." Again he insisted, "I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." Christian Gnostics blended Hellenistic philosophy with a mystical interpretation of these and other sayings of Jesus. They proclaimed that God was within every person as a light from an unfailing eternal light, which would continue forever as the source of life. The Gnostics, like the Athenians, governed their societies democratically. Nobody could be king if everybody was one already. This idea of the inner king was at heart of various medieval heresies. Protestantism incorporated the idea into its doctrine of a priesthood of all believers. This doctrine was wedded to the memory of Athenian democracy to provide the psychological and spiritual basis for the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Huey Long's democratic ideal of, quote, "every man a king," close quote, is the socio-political expression of the psychological truth that there is a king within every man. Modern culture and the repression of the inner king. Whether the men of a pre-modern society internalized the archetypal king as an inner deity or projected him onto a sacred king or a sky-dwelling king god, the archetype was an experienced reality. This changed with the onset of modernity. Though there are antecedents, we locate the beginnings of the modern era primarily with the 18th century French Enlightenment. Characterized in broad terms by rationalism and materialistic reductionism, the Enlightenment is still impacting world cultures. Rationalism is the ego's domain and, in theory, excludes intuitive or emotional modes of thought. According to modernity, rationalism is the highest expression of human being. Anyone interested in mystery or alternative modes of reality is called superstitious or obscurantist. Materialistic reductionism is the doctrine that there is no reality besides what can be perceived by the sense or the various instruments of science. Science is the great faith of the modern era. We believe the universe to be a vast machine, and the unknown is mysterious, only because we have yet to invent instruments to explain it to us. The fruits of this faith are impressive. Rapid advances in the fields of technology and theoretical and applied science have supported the concurrent developments of rationalist politics, industrialized economies, and materialistic consumerism. Demythalization characterizes thought in the religious sphere. Sacred myths are regarded now as pre-scientific attempts to explain natural processes. Myths are said to represent wishful thinking in response to the harsh realities of socioeconomic forces in a mechanical universe. Rationalism is, of course, irrational, in the assumption that only a particular mode of consciousness is valid. Our modern era has been aptly described as a cramp in the left brain. Even the materialistic perspective on brain functioning demonstrates that modernity neglects most of the nervous system. The left brain's logical, linear thought processes are prized, but the right brain's feeling-inflected cognition is not, nor are the more instinctual impulses and behaviors that arise in the deeper layers of the brain, nervous system, and body. Right brain cognition leads us to very different conclusions about the nature of reality than does left brain's rationalism. Ironically, even the thinkers on the rationalist frontier, Kant, Einstein, and Heisenberg, for example, made discoveries that contradict the rationalistic doctrines of modernity. Unfortunately, society at large has yet to catch up to its leading intellectuals. We suffer serious consequences from the stubborn rationalism of our societies and of our times. Young observed long ago that without an adequate spirituality, with a super-rational experience of transpersonal other at its center, a psychic vacuum is created, which the unconscious fills with inferior psychic contents. According to our view, the central content of a male psyche is the masculine self. This is represented to the male ego largely as the archetypal king. Since agnostic modernity withholds the masculine self from the ego, the missing king god in the unconscious is replaced by inadequate, ultimately dysfunctional objects of transpersonal commitment. We try to make lesser gods suffice for the masculine self. Our minor deities include the state, the party, the people, the company, and science. While these things are important, they cannot substitute for the God within. They are not reliable suppliers of libido. The state becomes oppressive, the party corrupt, the people prove to be fickle, the company rarely rewards our loyalty, and the faith we have in science as tangible materialism is undermined by the very discoveries of science. The modern age is an age of regicide. One of rationalism's immediate products was the guillotine. While undoubtedly the French Revolution was an inevitable political corrective, what does it mean when a people beheads its king? But this is the script we are still playing today. The French Revolution was partly inspired by the American model, and because the culmination of theirs was so extreme, it provided inspiration in turn to the anarchists and socialists of the 19th and 20th century Europe. When for a short time the Russian revolutionaries felt their successes slipping, they too committed regicide to absolutely confirm the process they had begun. There are few monarchs left today who do not serve largely a symbolic function. These modern dictators who try to set themselves up as kings have to build up a brutal military to maintain their position. Though, ironically, the same troops are often behind the coup d'etat that secures the dictator's eventual downfall. A global instinct for regicide is in some sense rich with possibilities. No longer do masses of people need to feel enslaved by powers beyond their control. Once the masses reject the absolute power of the state, they make room for themselves to take power as individuals. Unfortunately, at this period in history, our instinct is to take power away from our leaders and then avoid it ourselves. Once the king is beheaded and the people have visceral proof that such a thing can happen, they begin to see the king that is within them. But the archetype of the king is so psychoactive, so incredibly loaded with power, it scares people. When an energy scares us, we try to dissociate ourselves from it. This is why individuation in Jung's view a moral struggle. The archetypes are imperialistic. They do not want to share the psyche and be balanced in one against the other. Each wants to complete hegemony, but we do not want to be an archetype. Maturity is getting to a place of strength where none of the archetypes can take us against our wills and possess us. We don't want to let any of them either. The archetypal energy we can hold on to will be a source for everything we do. And because the source is in the collective psyche, it will never run dry. There is never a need to be sparing with this energy, because if used properly, it is inexhaustible. A mortal man cannot hold the projection of the king for long. There are plenty of men who love trying. They find thousands of others willing to give their power away, and all that power can be deeply seductive. The man who accepts all the power he's offered lights up like a target. In our regicidal era, sooner or later someone will come along and say, "There's a king, let's kill him." But until this happens, he starts to believe he is the archetype. After all, he's glowing with the archetype's energy. He's lit up like a Christmas tree, and everyone around him confirms his radiance. Archetypes are not human, and can do nothing wrong. They cannot be destroyed. So the man who is possessed by the archetype starts to believe he is invulnerable too. Maybe he gets the idea to run for office. This goes well, so he thinks. Why not run for president? Everyone around him tells what a great idea that is, what a great job he's doing. So he lights up. And when rumors are spread about his extramarital affairs, he holds a press conference. "Why don't you put a tail on me?" he dares the reporters. At this moment in time, he's almost too bright to look at. Pretty soon afterward, of course, he's over his inflation, because the press never tail an archetype. They follow a real, flesh and blood man home and take pictures of the woman who comes to stay the weekend. Or maybe you're a little more careful to conceal your affairs, because everyone thinks your wife is a national treasure, and you like the light that casts on you. But you nickname your administration Camelot, and you ignore what your faithful Secret Service men tell you about your relative popularity in Texas. That's what you've come here to address. You can ride around Dallas with your car top down. You've faced danger before and won on your own terms. The people need to be seen by you, and anyway, nobody can kill an archetype. Archetypal dynamics must not be taken lightly. If we let them, the king will take us over, as a magnet takes over an iron filings. On the other hand, we cannot repudiate him because he is the archetype that, properly accessed, regulates the other three archetypes of the mature masculine. Without the king, the ego has no access to life-sustaining libido. But this isn't the worst of it. When the ego ignores the archetype, an ominous dynamic is set in motion. The archetypes manifest to the ego in their destructive bipolar shadow forms, disrupting personal life and wreaking devastation in the world. A borderline personality is an extreme example of a psyche that holds a lot of archetypal energies without a king to keep them in order. The gods must have their due. Without it, they become hostile, reminding us of their presence in unpleasant, even life-threatening ways. Just before the outbreak of World War II, Jung became fascinated by an uprush of archetypal material he noted in the collective unconscious of the German people. Jung believed the Nazi movement drew upon the attributes of Wotan and the Teutonic god of storm and wrath, citing the return of the repressed. Phenomenon typical of his psychotic patients, Jung theorized that Wotan had returned through the collective unconscious of the Nazis because they had repressed their spirituality. A transpersonal commitment to death and destruction replaced the God image in the German unconscious. Jung believed the God image was the only psychological adequate transpersonal other. The Nazis suffered its absence and made millions suffer with them. Ego inflation occurs in the absence of such a transpersonal other. Our modern era itself represents this inflation by its exclusive reverence for rationalism and materialism. Without a spiritual dimension, the ego loses the ability to orient itself generatively in the context of a larger reality. To be generative, as we've noted, the ego must be engaged in the ego archetypal axis. Whatever is unconscious to us possesses us. If we wish to differentiate ourselves from our possessors, we must first become conscious of them. Becoming conscious of the archetypal king within, we can realize the ego king axis while at the same time differentiating ourselves from the archetype. We thereby avoid becoming inflated by it. Jung believed inflated egos have perpetrated most of the horrors of history. The present catastrophic world situation is certainly a legacy of ego inflation. Jung felt that the collective unconscious has retaliated against the ego's God almightiness by the development of the atom bomb. The collective human self, in personal nature and psychological form, used the ego's own rational dynamics to bring the unspeakable into being, dramatizing the absurdity of the ego's inflated arrogance. The postmodern return of the king. We are now moving in a postmodern era, one which is recovering a sense of hidden, divine, and psychological language. Archetypal heights and depths, rationalism and modernity are collapsing under their own irrational weight, and that collapse has prepared the way for the return of the king. The first serious crack in rationalism's facade appeared after Einstein published his theory of relativity. Though this theory is the better part of a century old, modernity lingers on because the world of subatomic physics is so intellectually challenging. Popularizers are still having difficulty explaining the meaning of the work Einstein and his colleagues have left us. The atom bomb, of course, is one directed application of the work. Rationalism's apocalyptic achievement is based upon discoveries that undercut the certainties of rationalism. Among the most disconcerting discoveries was that our apparently solid world is mostly made of empty space. Atoms can be described as akin to mini solar systems, in which subatomic particles are relatively just as small and far apart from one another as are the planets of our solar system. Furthermore, the major subatomic components of the electron, proton, and neutrons can be broken down into even smaller components, which can themselves be broken down, and so on in apparently endless regression. These particles exhibit extremely bizarre characteristics. They seem to be able to travel backward in time. They seem capable of localizing in two places at once, without ever having divided. These tiniest of particles may not even be particles. They also behave as if they were waves of radiant energy. They appear to spontaneously arise from and subside into mysterious underlying energy grid and an invisible matrix which may permeate what we have considered to be the void of empty space. Subatomic particles seem to be transient, granular concentrations of this underlying energy field. This makes the void fairly dense with energy, whatever energy may be. Many have noted how the new physicists have had to resort to the elusive spiritual language of mystics to explain their concepts. Physicists working with astronomers are inventing a new mystical cosmology. These new theories are fundamentally challenging to modernity's assumptions about the nature of reality. According to the prevalent Big Bang theory, this immense universe was once packed into a tiny point smaller than an atom's nucleus. Within this unimaginable density, the four major energetic forces that drive and shape our universe were combined in one single, undifferentiated force. Max Planck worked calculations back to chart the universe's course to within 10/43 of a second after the Big Bang. Before this time, he proposed what we now designate as the Planck era, in which time and space as we know them did not exist. Recent theorists have enjoyed speculating about the Planck era. They imagine a kind of foam that throws out bubbles, most of which fall back into the Planck era. Those that escape explode into universes, each of which generates its own unique space-time. Our universe is one which is expanding bubble. Each bubble contains in miniature the inherent structures of the universe it will become. Astronomers have now collected sufficient data to map galaxy distributions, and they found that galaxies are distributed in vast strings and clumps. This is in accord with the uneven quality physicists believe to have been implicit in our tiny Planck era bubble. As if these discoveries weren't enough to confound the rationalist ego, biologists have begun to explore the unseen dimensions from which biological forms and processes derive. Just as there is an implicit grid along with the mineral crystals form in an explicit detail, biological phenomena seem to arise as explications of a mysterious implicate order. Adolf Portman postulates hidden operators or structural forms explaining formation and new formation in the realm of living organisms are not a production of order or out of a disordered chaos. They are the production of order out of an already given ordered structure. Portman has spoken of an invisible abyss of mystery, in which these structural forms are implicit, and an immense unknown realm of the mysterious. Once again we find scientists speaking like a mystic, and even like a depth psychologist. Young noticed striking resemblances to ideas of a modern science turning up in the dream productions of his analyzans. What is an archetype if not a notion of implicate order, of just the type of postulated by physicists, biologists, and astronomers? Jung's abyss of mystery within the psyche, the illimitable collective unconscious, is an invisible structure giving transient form in the material world to various complexes and urges. There seems to be emerging a unitary postmodern worldview in which the mystical traditions, psychology, and the physical sciences all serve to elucidate aspects of the same underlying reality. That underlying reality reveals the presence of the landscape of the king within the human psyche. Postmodern ideas of sacred and profane. Perhaps we can parallel the two fundamental dimensions of scientific reality, the implicate and the explicate, with the sacred and profane dimensions of the sacred king's world. The ancient idea of divine order in mythic time and space seems to agree with the ideas of implicate structures, strings, granular space, and invisible operators. This may be an aspect of the divine order we have referred to as Ma'at, Dharma, Tao, and Torah. There is also the sacred notion that in the sacred time, or the shared notion that in the sacred time and space of the Planck era, all things existed in undifferentiated unity. There is strikingly parallel to the pleroma of the Gnostics, the Buddhist nirvana, the Hindu unmanifest Brahman, the Christian paradise, and the Jungian collective self. Jungian analyst Yolan Jacobi has noted that many prominent scientists, including Planck, Hartmann, Yüksel, Eddington, and Jeans, have come against an impassable barrier between what empirical knowledge can discover and what metaphysics alone can grasp. We call this left-brain barrier the wall of paradise, after the ancient theologian Nicholas of Cusa. On our side of the wall, primordial unity manifests in pairs of opposites. On the other side, everything exists in complete harmony. In the Planck era, the four forces of nature were joined into two, and two into one. Taoists say that the appearance of two signaled the inception of the created world. Before two is the Tao, unknowable in its pure essence. And in Babylonian mythology, the universe began when Marduk slew Tiamat and divided her into two. The Egyptian universe began when the primordial hill arose from the cosmic ocean, creating two dimensions of reality. And just as creation myths hold that sacred energy erupted into profane at a single point, then radiated outward, so the Big Bang theory argues the universe began within an infinitesimally small point. After an unmanageable explosion, radiant energy spread in every direction. Our sphere of space and time is still standing. We can find a direct parallel to this in the Jewish tradition, which tells us, quote, "The Most Holy One created the world like an embryo. As the embryo grows from the navel, so God began to create the world by the navel, and from there it spread out into all directions." Close quote. The emerging postmodern worldview is in a way a remytholization of the universe. The teachings of the great spiritual traditions no longer seem so far-fetched. From the theory of the archetypes to the operators of biological forms, it is once again reasonable to speak of an invisible order trying to incarnate in the lives of individual humans. Of course, physics, astronomy, and biology do not speak the anthropomorphic language of the myths of the king, but they do point to a creative ordering which moves the potential into the actual. Creating order through an incarnational process is the central characteristic of the archetypal king. The king is returning in the postmodern world. Chapter 9. Welcome the King into our lives. An unseen dimension of reality is behind the created world in modern science as in ancient myth. With a burst of heat and light, the Big Bang provided the radiant energy our universe is built upon. The energy dissipated across various cosmic eras, time functioning as a step-down transformer system, slowing the energy until the matter was able to take form. Living things on our planet, and possibly on others, depend on the still dissipating energy of the stars. Entropy is a law of thermodynamics that order within a closed system will tend to decay. The higher forms of energy will tend to be converted into lower forms. The entropy that characterizes our universe has been recognized as a given in myths of all eras. Some ancient peoples believed the universe periodically dissolved and then was renewed by a fresh eruption of sacred energy. Most believed as well that a gradual wearing process had begun immediately after creation. Some cosmologists parallel the ancient idea of universal death and rebirth with the theory that the universe will eventually stop expanding, then collapse in upon itself back to another infinitesimal point, which will explode again in another Big Bang, and so on forever. For the Hindus, this is the waking and sleeping of Brahman. He falls asleep, the universe collapses. He awakens, the universe expands. Many ancient peoples believed it was necessary to regenerate the cosmos at intervals much briefer than the cosmic cycles. Regular infusions of divine force from the sacred dimension were required to counteract the effects of universal entropy. For these people, every act of cultural creation, from raising a new home to crowning a sacred king, was recapitulated of the creation of the world. Through these acts, the renewal cosmogony was remembered and present, much as Catholic doctrine teaches that Christ is present in the Eucharist, renewing all who partake of him. What is necessary for the cosmos is necessary for us too. Moving from grand speculations about the fundamental importance of cosmic regeneration to a consideration of our own daily needs for renewal need not be thought of as a move from the sublime to the ridiculous. We are simply shifting perspective to a level of being midway between the macrocosm of the galaxies and the microcosm of particles in the quantum field. If we take God to be in part an image of the macrocosm, we can see the sense of the mystic tenet, quote, God is a circle whose center is everywhere, and whose circumference is nowhere, close quote. Within our holographic universe, inner and outer, above and below, increasingly seem to be subjective perspectives. The whole seems to be entirely present in each of its parts. Both depth psychology turns the ancient phrase, as above, so below, into healing exhortation, as within, so without. If men can be encouraged to establish order within themselves, the world as a whole will benefit. We have all experienced the feeling of gradually running out of time, out of energy, of needing a kickstart. We all grow weary at times of our life situation, of our friends, of work, home, some nagging problem, even sometimes of usual favorite entertainments. Think of some of the ways we've tried to relieve ourselves of the feeling that life has become dull, uninteresting, and sterile. Think of a time when buying a new car didn't do the trick. Getting together with the boys at the favorite watering hole wasn't much fun either. Even the vacation to Mexico fell flat. These pursuits may have brought their temporary happiness, but really what we needed was to go back in touch with the waters of life running within us. When our profane mini-cosmos runs out of libido, what we need is a transfusion of primordial energy from the sacred realm of the deep psyche. The same libido is what we were looking for when we found it impossible to realize our dreams in the everyday world. How many times have we imagined a dream house and then realized we could never afford the payments? How many times has the new job we approached with such great hopes and expectation turned into another dead end? How many of us have been swept away by the ecstasy of love, then discovered only after the marriage ceremony the enormous work it takes to deepen the magic and grow the relationship? Both the imaginal realm and the everyday world are actual and real. They both involve tangible psychological experiences, but it is a difficult process to bring imaginal visions into the material world. Fantasies, visions, dream figures, and inner voices are the lures the unconscious uses to tempt us toward individuation and toward forming ego-archetype axis. Our ego's task is to attend to these messages. We must discover who among these sacred messengers can help us achieve realistic happiness, which of their dream promises we can embody in our profane world, who are the true emissaries of the King within. Psychotherapy, attending to the unconscious. Modernity has never encouraged men to acquire knowledge of the deeper layers of their masculine psyches, but it is here that the inexhaustible reservoir of masculine identity lies. Self-exploration is prohibited by the rigid rationalistic and materialistic cultural canons of our modern era. Ever since the inscription was carved into the facade of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, "Know thyself," self-exploration has been recognized as the key to authentic human being. With the idea now in disrepute Many, if not most, men are deprived of any real chance to experience themselves as the richly nuanced, self-empowered male primates they were meant to be. As we've explored, the ego that is denied access to the archetypal king will likely be possessed by the king's bipolar shadow. This poorly accessed king is not solely the result of culturally determined resistance to probing the riches of inner space. It is also the consequence of inadequate fathering. Many of us have grown up with the weakling or tyrant fathers. Often they were absent from us, emotionally or physically, or both, and emotional absence is characteristics of the Shadow King. A man possessed by the Shadow King is not present for us, and so does not see us or celebrate us, and has no desire to do either. Absent fathers do far more damage to masculine identities than many men realize. Freud drew Western attention to the pervasive mother and father issues of our culture. By a psychological mechanism termed repetition compulsion, our unconscious compels us, even in adulthood, to repeat the childhood traumas we suffered at the hands of our parents. We recapitulate at the same time the negative relational patterns imprinted on us when we were young, before we had any ego structure to speak of, or any defensible psychological boundaries. While it can be beneficial to consciously reopen the old emotional wounds, too often they possess us unaware. Too often they possess us unawares. Okay. We retain the dysfunctional patterns of relating learned in childhood. These patterns sabotage our attempts to live lives of realistic greatness, undermining what should be the most generative years of our lives. Our fathers, of course, grew up in a world that damaged them in a similar way. The, quote, father archetype some analysts speak of, we believe to be one of the faces of the king. Fathers are always kings to their children, and too often they are tyrants. Once children mature, they depose their tyrants. So a father tyrant may feel that he has nothing to gain by letting his children grow up. His world taught him, kick them first before they kick you, and he can't imagine any other way. But it is one thing to disavow a father, and quite another to do the inner work necessary to reconcile with him. Because painful experiences are so deeply repressed, the average man, we have no idea how wounded he is until he loses his job, or contracts a debilitating illness, or perhaps after his marriage fails, or he faces a major crisis with his children. Most men do not avail themselves of psychotherapy until such crises arise. Even then, the vast majority will not seek help. Cultural mores teach them that it is unmanly to look for any. Men have been taught not to feel pain, or at least not to show any painful feelings. It can be so painful to break through the repression barrier that shields us from our lifetime store of unlived suffering. It is not too surprising many men would rather self-destruct than try. Often even when men do engage in psychotherapeutic process, they are completely surprised by the amount of pain that surfaces in early sessions. It is common to hear a man express the belief that he had great parents and a happy home. Only in later sessions does his devastation, his loneliness, and the dissolution of his sense of worthlessness arise. This worthlessness may have been conveyed by his mother and his father. As these feelings become conscious, male counselees frequently develop a resistance to any further self-reflection. Another of our unhelpful cultural lessons is that men should not have feelings of sorrow, vulnerability, helplessness, tenderness, gentleness, or compassion for themselves or others. Such feelings are supposedly feminine. Most men work so hard, whether consciously or not, to achieve an over-exaggerated, culturally defined masculinity that any suggestion they might be less than fully masculine is deeply threatening. Lurking behind the revelation of authentic feeling lies the unconscious fear of once again merging with the mother, of a regression into passivity, of gender-neutral infantilism. When a man chooses to engage in the psychotherapeutic process, he faces inner work that will take his utmost courage and effort. He will have to get to know his inner child and come to comfort him. He will have to face his personal shadow. Initially mortal enemies, he and his shadow will have to be reconciled. He will have to face his inner feminine by knowing and loving his anima. Together the two must work out a mutually enhancing relationship, a task requiring as much skill and effort as lifelong intimacies require in the outer world. This man will become an expert in the delicate art of interpreting his dreams. Dreams will reveal to him the complexual and archetypal inhabitants of his inner world. He will need to reclaim as many split-off parts of himself as he can in the dangerous but rewarding process of self-integration. He will likely master techniques of imaging and holding dialogues with unconscious aspects of himself. Eventually, he will have a series of encounters with the masculine self at the core of his being. He will come before the cosmic throne at the heart of his total psychic system and at least acquire aspects of generative man. Most psychologies regard the overcoming of the parental introjects, internalized images of the parents, as one of the most crucial steps in the development of an autonomous, cohesive self. Some psychologists speak of slaying the parents, others of getting beyond the imago, the emotionally imprinted introject carried by the inner child of both parents, and their positive and negative characteristics. Breaking free of the parents can be an extending undertaking. As infants, we are so completely dependent on them, and the time we humans spend in childhood is so substantial that any negative relational pattern have years in which to be reinforced. We learn as very young children how to repress any anger we may feel toward our parents. So some aspects of our relationships must first be made conscious before we can even begin to cut our ties. But cut them we must, if we wish to be self-empowered. Many men find it very difficult to free themselves of the internalized father as well as the internalized mother. A major contributing factor to this is the projection dynamic. When a man projects, he unconsciously experiences others as if they were a lost part of himself. He may project aspects of his personal shadow on another male, and then vilify that person for faults that are already his own unacknowledged issues. He may also project archetypal contents onto others. His parents may continue to have power over him in his adulthood because he projects his king and queen onto them. It is sensible for a boy to see his mother and father as nearly godlike, because they do, in fact, have a lot of power over him, even the power of life and death, as the child abuse statistics so grimly testify. A boy will fear and idealize his parents at the same time. He needs to trust his parents' wisdom and goodness, no matter how harshly they treat him, because his survival and sense of security depend upon them. The projection mechanism at least anchors the boy in the world with some sense of security. However, it may be skewed, and introduces him to the archetypal king and queen through his idealizations of his parents. Defense mechanisms can be useful when there is something real to defend against. Eventually, during the maturation process, they must be discarded, but they may be necessary at certain stages. At some point, the boy will begin to feel a disjunction between his parents and his archetypal projections. At this point, he needs to be enabled to withdraw his projections. To the extent that he accomplishes this, he will see that the archetypes are independent of his parents, that they are within him, yet separate from his ego. If he does not succeed in this, he will never love his parents for the precious, flawed, immortal people they are. He equally may continue to project the archetypes on his lover or spouse or authority figures in his later life. If he can free these others of his projections, he will be freed in turn of expecting them to be perfectly supportive and loving with him. His adult relationships will then be much more realistic sources of happiness and fulfillment. We often hear grown men speak of their parents at the idealizing level of a 5-year-old. They romanticize the 1 or 2 times their fathers took them fishing, for example, and, rather than seeing their mothers as the weak or frightened women they were, these men make of them martyred saints, thereby crippling their own capacity for autonomous, guilt-free functioning. The idealization drops away in stages as a man begins to own his disappointment, sorrow, and rage over his actual treatment. As this happens, he can properly return to the perfect parents, to the mythic realm of his imaginations. Once the projections are withdrawn from the parents or lovers, spouses, sometimes even children, and early traumas have been recovered and processed, a man is on the road to healing. According to our experience, traditional psychotherapy is rarely enough to heal him. Objectifying the inner child, comforting and confronting him does not automatically produce adult structure. While holding dialogues with the personal shadow, the anima, and other complexes, the ego may be overwhelmed by the hostilities of these once spurned inner entities. Some men are so damaged that they have very little adult structure to bring to the dialogic task. Even if made aware of the wounded inner child, these men may not have the ego they need to diffuse the child's regressive force. Many psychologies, social and interactive and Freudian among them, give up at this point. To these systems of thought, we are only what we have been programmed to be. It would seem some programs cannot be undone. Developmental psychologists will often be deeply pessimistic about the prognosis for severely wounded people. They discover that we all make our basic decisions about the world, about whether it is fundamentally a supportive or harmful place, within the first 6 months to a year of life. Jungians are a bit more helpful because the archetypes provided us all with genetically wired resources for wholeness. The circuits we need for personal well-being are there for us in the unconscious. For men, the masculine archetypes are potentially enormous structure sources of libido, regardless of how much damage we have sustained early in life. John Weir Perry has demonstrated how these energy sources, especially the king, have the capacity to restructure and reorient the psyches of even profoundly disturbed people. In Roots of Renewal and Myth and Madness, Perry cites the case of a man who exhibited the scattered thinking and affect of an acute schizophrenic. At a certain point in his treatment, this man drew a square, circle, and cross on the wall in a concentric pattern. He located himself at the center of the drawing. At this central point, he saw himself as having the characteristics of Jesus Christ. He also drew pictures in which he figured himself as the fourth of a divine quaternity, also including God, the Father, the Virgin Mary, and Jesus. Those archetypal outpourings help a man to healthfully reorganize his psyche. The visions provided hit this man with a sense of meaningful structure and purpose in his life. It cannot be said that this man, or the other profoundly disturbed individuals Perry worked with, became normal following these visions of wholeness, but their contact with our archetypes, particularly the archetype of the king, helped them achieve a higher level of psychological organization and greater personal integration. The archetypes offer all of us images of fulfillment, authenticity, and maturity. If a wounded man can get to them, or if they spontaneously come to his rescue through dreams or visions, he can more or less transcend his wounding and achieve a significant degree of generativity in his life. The depth psychological process of analysis is, we believe, the most effective way to get to the ground of the psyche. More than any other psychotherapeutic process, depth psychology respects the images of the archetypes the unconscious produces. They are guides to the achievement of full human being. If all goes well, they will lead us to a condition of true humility. Two admissions bring us to true humility. First, we admit that our lives are in some important respect out of control. We have fallen victim to destructive unconscious compulsions. And second, we admit that we need help. Once we've internalized the admissions, we've gone as far as our boyish heroic consciousness can carry us. From this far edge of legitimate grandiosity, we are ready to step with true humility before the King, and receive from a sense of our realistic greatness. Along the way, we will have been gaining an appreciation of how our lives have been possessed by the king's bipolar shadow system. We can then objectify both the shadow system and the king himself. Just as we did with our parents, we need to experience the archetypal systems as out there and separate from our ego. For those tyrants we have identified themselves with the king, this experience is profoundly humbling. These men will feel alarmingly smaller and less powerful than they are used to feeling. Once they understand their real size, they have a profound understanding of the enormity of the power that has possessed them. For those weaklings who have had little awareness of the autonomous forces within them, early attempts to objectify and access the king may seem like exercises in pure fantasy, but when the king is successfully realized, the ego is profoundly moved, even with a sense of divine revelation. The king may seem to suddenly materialize out of the void, presenting himself to the astonished ego in an awesome aspect. Perhaps Ezekiel's encounter with the divine chariot and Arjuna's vision of Krishna were experiences of this sort. Certainly the man who encounters the numinous king often suddenly feels that he is in sacred place, standing on holy ground. He may feel his flesh creep, or the hairs rising on the back of his neck. The intuition of holiness is really of the sacred space at the center of the psyche, from whence the king energy radiates. The energy concentrated at the center is both dreadful and wonderful by virtue of its power. It drops us to our knees with the force of its holiness. We respond as a creature before its creator. The wonder of the king is the light and pure healing life force he emanates. The anxious ego relaxes its neurotic grip on life and lets the king restore it to its proper place in the scheme of things. The restoration of a proper perspective allows the ego to transcend daily difficulties and experience the reconstitution of the psyche as a total system. The ego faces the terror of dying to a constricting self-image and being reborn through transcendent function. This revelation of the king evokes for a man the startling knowledge that his I is not the center of things as he thought. Instead, he is free to become the servant of a numinous transpersonal other.
Active imagination as meditation, imagining the unconscious. Since the imagination is the mechanism through which the ego receives the images and symbols of the unconscious, Jung recommended that patients exercise their imaginations. He called an exercising engagement of the ego with the unconscious active imagination. In religious language, active imagination can be seen as a form of meditation. For the world's spiritual traditions, meditation consists of a variety of techniques for putting the ego into an altered state of consciousness, one in which it is focused on an inner spiritual contents, archetypes, and open to their numinous power. The purpose of active imagination techniques is to invite the unconscious to share with the ego more and more of its contents. Since at both personal and collective levels, the unconscious possesses wisdom and perspective far exceeding the ego's, and since the split-off aspects of our psyches reside there, the active engagement of the unconscious is essential. Any purposeful reverie is a form of active imagination. Dream analysis, ego archetype dialogues, the focused imaging of some meditation techniques, and the free association of spontaneous images, thoughts, and feelings all are means of inviting the unconscious to communicate. We want to explore focused meditation techniques and use them in relation to the archetypal king. Some are uncomfortable at first using images in a way that implies their objective reality. With the exception of Catholicism, our Western religions have prescribed the use of images when communing with the divine. Judaism and Islam are particularly adamant about this. Protestant Christians have sometimes been taught that images of the saints or Christ on the cross are suspiciously Catholic at best, superstitious and pagan at worst. Even so, Protestant churches often display paintings of Jesus and his followers, since they take the biblical injunction to be specifically against the graven, that is, carved images. But Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all supply verbal images of God and the spiritual dimension. For the average person, the deity is not merely an intellectual personification of goodness, love, wrath, or any impersonal quality. Most people, after reading texts or hearing them read aloud, have drawn mental images of a more or less anthropomorphic deity. Strictly defined, idolatry is the worshipping of something less powerful in the place of an all-powerful God. In this sense, idolatry is making something other than the king carry our transpersonal commitment. It is investing something personal with transpersonal significance. Yet the gods of all religions manifest both personal and impersonal aspects. The exalted Christian Trinity is also the man, Jesus, with whom we can walk in the garden alone. Anthropomorphic images of the deity point beyond themselves to God. They can serve as aids to worship. Images and symbols, whether verbalized and sculpted or painted, engage us on an emotional and cognitive level. Anthropomorphic images of archetypal realities, of whom the king god is a culminating one, are helpful to us in reaching the structure of the masculine self. We would argue that these images are essential for psychological health. When God becomes the abstraction he is in our times, the ego unconsciously depicts itself as godlike. We cannot image the king, we pretend to his throne. Imaging the king helps us objectify and separate the true center of the psyche. After all, it's harder to think you're the king when you're talking to him. Projection of the king is not always a misguided practice. When we project the inner king onto our outer images, we form for ourselves a concrete mental and emotional focus. We provide screen upon which the archetypes can present itself to us, and is true for all archetypal material. The king is ultimately mysterious and unrepresentable. Nevertheless, we enable ourselves to relate to him by objectifying his manifest qualities. He becomes a psychological fact with whom we establish contact. We have all heard a version of the saying, quote, "You are what you think," close quote. Following a belief in the power of positive thinking, we are often encouraged to repeat affirmations to ourselves, or image ourselves successfully completing a business task or a tricky athletic move. There is abundant anecdotal and clinical evidence to suggest that dwelling upon certain images helps bring them into our material lives. And all of us know of cases in our own or our friends' lives of self-fulfilling prophecies. Perhaps this work only becomes repeatedly thinking about a preferred outcome, keeps the goal present in our mind's eye, and so helps us work harder over a longer period of time to achieve it. Or perhaps our focus triggers some unconscious mechanism that takes ferocious care to see what we achieve our profound desires. The latter mechanism seems implied in the popular admonition, quote, "Be careful what you ask for, you might get what you get." You might get it. Close quote. It would seem likely that just as the unconscious uses the imagination to get through to the ego, so the ego can use imagination to activate and influence the unconscious. If this is true, it is the best that the ego make use of the most powerful and appropriate images it knows, the images of the archetypes. By using these with the unconscious, the ego generates an ego-masculine self-axis mundi, along with the mutual imaging can travel unfettered in either direction. In our view, then, no one needs to be discomfited by a fear of idolatry. The imaging is a creative, suggestive activity, a way of establishing contact with the unconscious, not of mistaking God for God. A postmodern program of remytholization will be part of our imaging. Most pre-modern peoples accepted myths as being literally true, with little or no reflection upon their deeper significance. Modernity has denied myth and ritual any significance at all, while at the same time living according to unexamined myths of a scientific, rational nature. A postmodern reappropriation of mythic imagination and ritual processes acknowledges both their emotional and cognitive significance. We recreate the myths and participate in their rituals, understanding that they are useful psychological means of getting to otherwise blocked libido. Myth provides a mindset within which we can all call up the archetypes. Ritual is the process of individual invitation and dialogue. It helps the imaging process to collect pictures, photographs, paintings, and other artistic representation archetype. These images will become our images of the Deus absconditus, the hidden God. The images we select need to convey to us the qualities of the fully expressed King. We need images of his power and vitality, his calm and vigor, his phallic energy, and his generativity. They should be decidedly masculine. If effeminate Christs and gentle Buddhas are chosen to represent the king in his loving aspect, they should be balanced with images suggesting the king's aggressive might. Pictures of a wrathful king should be offset by photographs or other aids illustrating his mercy, his concern for and blessing of his people. Images of the king destroying his mortal enemies in battle need to be viewed as expressions of the struggle against chaos and death. It is best to avoid photographs of actual reigning monarchs. Contemporary men often do not have the power to bring alive for us the archetypal king, as well as representations of past rulers do. There is a benefit in choosing unfamiliar, impersonal imagery. The strange will be free of the weight of our preconceptions, which might otherwise influence the content of our reveries.
Useful are images of Egyptian pharaohs, Assyrian kings, and Chinese emperors. Reproductions of associated kingly concurrents, such as old coins of Greek or Roman gods or emperors, swords, suits of armor, archaeological drawings of temples, ziggurats, and pyramids can also be useful. Collecting all these may seem foolish at first, and that is fine. Remember, our aim was simply to use the impersonal power these images hold for the unconscious to evoke feelings, states of mind, and visions of fullness. Our postmodern perspective allows us the freedom not to take ourselves too seriously while we choose to actively engage our images and props during our personal rituals. Some men find great benefit in setting aside a specific place to hold their impersonal archetypal reveries. Many wear talismans that remind them of the abiding presence of the archetypal king. Native American medicine bags, rings, chains, and other tokens may serve as portable transformers of king energy. We have found a small crystal pyramid to be a useful portable icon. As we've seen in previous chapters, the pyramid has long been a structure associated with the sacred king. It is at once an image of the quadrated structure of the masculine self, see Appendix A, and a crystallization of the radiating life force of the king. A brief meditation or focused imagination experiment can be a liberating exercise for men who feel beset and besieged. We have recommended the following exercise in active imagination for use with the pyramid icon to many of our counselees and analysans. Imagine yourself inside the pyramid, or imagine it inside of you, perhaps in the chest area. It pictures to you your own invincible, unassailable inner structure, that part of you that is eternally durable, that is everlasting and inviolable, whatever may befall you in your day-to-day life. The pyramid sides are smooth, they are polished and flawless. There are no cracks, holes, or chips in them. When danger threatens, when you feel like you're about to fragment, get inside of the pyramid or imagine it inside of you, protecting your heart, protecting your essence, your true self. Picture the danger as the stormy waves of a wind-tossed sea. Visualize these waves crashing against the glass-smooth sides of the pyramid, thundering against them, but harmlessly unable to shatter them. See the waves breaking against the pyramid, which remains impervious to their battering. Watch the fury of the waves gradually abate until calm is restored. Then imagine yourself wiping the pyramid dry, polishing it to its former brilliance, the danger past. Finally, step back out of the pyramid or set it free of your chest and resume your daily life, your relationship to, and not your detached from, the vicissitudes of normal human being. Obviously, it will be difficult to read this aloud and meditate on it at the same time. One answer is not to worry about the exact text, but let your mind follow the gist of the exercise in your own personal terms. If you prefer listening to these words while you meditate, it might be easiest to read this exercise slowly and thoughtfully into a tape recorder, so you can play it back while you meditate. This leaves your mind free to do the active imagination work. Some men have never meditated before, and the idea of doing it may seem strange or uncomfortable. If you do meditate, follow your own practice with this work. But if you're new to this, we don't expect you to learn all the breathing techniques of some orthodox practice. All you need to do is find a quiet, private time and place. Sit someplace comfortable in a position you can keep for some time. Many like us use a cushion on the floor. Then clear your mind of your day-to-day thoughts and concerns, and let your focus turn to the exercise we've given above. Follow whatever spontaneous images occur and record them so you can return to them later. Using the pyramid in this way evokes a sense of inner structure and of defensible psychological boundaries. This Amanat pyramid connects us symbolically to rock and crystal, time-honored images of the enduring masculine self. A postmodern ritual such as the one above provides us the experience of the archetypal king as a sheltering, indomitable structure and as the tranquil essence at the center of our world. Through focused imaging, we come to realize that ego and archetype are separate aspects of the psyche. At the same time, we call upon the king to help repair and reconstitute our sense of self. In a sense, meditation confirms Muhammad's saying that the king is closer than the vein of thy neck. As we study pictures and artifacts of the king we've collected, we need to internalize what they represent. We need to find a quiet, private time to sit before the images, contemplating them, beholding and cherishing them. We need to turn the archetypes around and around in our mind's eye, as if they were fine gems, their facets illuminated by the light of consciousness. We need to let our left brain appraise them, and to explore our right brain intuitions about them. The symbolic pictures and objects help anchor and objectify our images of the archetype we are seeking inside ourselves. We might include music to help create a ritual atmosphere. Traditional religious music, for example, the Hebrew Avenu Malanaku, serves very well for this. Some find they prefer to choose music with no lyrics, or at least no lyrics in English, because the words can influence and determine the train of thought, rather than letting it run along its individual track. Soundtracks from Sword and Sandals movies like Spartacus or Ben-Hur, or more recently Peter Gabriel's excellent music from The Last Temptation of Christ, all are particularly evocative of king energy. We can imagine absorbing, as we contemplate, the attributes of the king, his regal calm, his self-assurance, the firm boundaries he maintains for himself, the blessings he bestows on his people, as well as his generosity, his exuberance, creativity, forcefulness, and decisiveness. By absorbing them, we allow these qualities to heal the damaged layers of our psyches. According to the most sophisticated of the ancient view of the sacred kingship, the king was able to order his kingdom by simply putting his own life in order. He evoked generativity in his subjects by being generative himself. Focused imaging and meditation can work the king's same creative ordering magic for each of us. The best examples of the power of encounter with the king within come from the experience of those who are experimenting with this kind of important inner work. Large numbers of men from both the United States and abroad have been exploring the changes that occur in their lives when they seek audiences with the inner king. We have chosen to let the personal account of a man who recently lost his fight with cancer illustrate for us the generative and ennobling power of actually forming a relationship with the great Lord within. Before his recent death, Bill generously gave us permission to share his experience with others in the hope that others might benefit from his explorations in the inner world. In his public life, he was the editor of a major magazine and was widely respected as a public leader. In his early 60s, however, he became aware that he had lost a sense of meaning in his life and work and began to experience a great deal of despair. He had prided himself on being a tough-minded intellectual with little interest in either depth psychology or human spirituality. Not long after he entered his dark night of the soul, he had to face the additional shock of hearing his doctor tell him that he had cancer. He sought out analysis to help him face his life situation. Reluctantly, and with many doubts, he began to experiment with active imagination and inner dialogues. Much to his surprise, he found that helpful, caring companions awaited him in his inner world. Companions who, at Bill's 11th hour, opened up depths of meaning he had never dreamed of. Ultimately, the Pharaoh, the king, eased Bill's transition from the profane dimension of time and space into the sacred dimension beyond the grave. The following account, in his own words, tells us of the ritual he developed in cooperation with the great Pharaoh in the king's chamber within. Visits with the Pharaoh. Morning ritual. We have a large, old-fashioned bathtub. Every morning I get into the tub before I turn on the water. I visualize myself at the power center of a pyramid. I am in a large, circular room with a large bathtub in the center. There is a golden light above. This room with the tub is the only room inside this pyramid. It is the Pharaoh's exclusive bathing pyramid. He is allowing me to use it. I turn on the water to flow slowly and lie down. A long line of Egyptian women in long dresses enters the room single file. Each carries a ceramic pitcher of water. This is special healing water from the king's sacred well. As each woman moves by me, she empties her pitcher over my body into the tub. Each woman then moves on to form a circle around me. Then they begin singing and swaying or dancing with the music. The music is Wagner's Venusberg, music from Tannhauser, not Egyptian, obviously. After all of them have emptied their pitchers, I turn off the water faucet. They dance around me and sing for a short while longer, then file out. As they leave, the young magician teacher, Imhotep, and his mentor teacher enter with a magic healing potion. Imhotep pours the elixir into the tub. As I pour some bath oil or aromatic liquid into the tub. Then I often put on my headphones and listen to a tape called Journey of the Drums. Soon as Imhotep remains at the end of the tub, a group of men enter. They are Native Americans, with shields, spears, feathers, loincloths, and some wear feathered headdresses. They dance around and sing with the drums. Then the king, the Pharaoh, enters and sits in a large throne at the foot of my tub and oversees the whole ceremony. He is dressed in a long robe. He has long hair, is tall, with a deep resonant masculine voice, like Paul Robeson. He does not always participate in a noticeable way, but sometimes he simply holds his arm up in some kind of all-encompassing spiritual gesture. Usually I lay quietly during this period and meditate. Sometimes I try to sense the power of the pyramid, the golden light, the power of the water and the potion, the masculine energy of the men and the power of the king. The men and I sometimes chant Om or Ram during this time. Sometimes the Pharaoh chants mysterious words in a language I don't understand. Later the men leave, then sometimes the king and I talk briefly. He may bless me, I may ask for something, or I may thank him for the good things I now have. He leaves and the ritual is over. Afternoon ritual. I light some incense and make myself comfortable in my recliner. Then I begin to visualize. I am outside on the north side of the great Cheops pyramid. I enter the tunnel leading to the king's chamber. I follow it down and then upward as shown in the schematic drawings of this pyramid. Toward the top of the ascending tunnel I pass through a space that is beautifully tilled. A mysterious light fills the chamber. I get to the top and enter the antechamber. There, a knight, more like a medieval knight, with a spear and shield, greets me. He guards the king's chamber. He allows me to enter the chamber and aids me in opening the heavy granite door. I try to notice the odor of the incense. There is a golden light above the king. Inside I find the Pharaoh. Facing east, sitting in his throne, are standing nearby. He's expecting me and speaks to me. We converse. I ask for his blessing, thank him for his blessings. I ask him questions. Sometimes we talk about me and others' suggestions and advice. Sometimes we talk about my disease and I ask him for help in conquering it. Sometimes we just sit quietly, meditating together. At other times I move or he moves and our bodies meld into one. I try to feel the essence and the presence of his body and spirit, sometimes specifically going from my head to my toes, visualizing our bodies melding and me sensing the power and energy of the king. After a few minutes, we separate. We may converse some more. He blesses me and sometimes says the universal Judeo-Christian benediction, "The Lord bless you and keep you," and I leave. I leave by the same tunnels. This is the only way in and out of the king's chamber. I salute the warrior knight and begin my walk down the descending tunnel. If I feel especially exuberant, I may slide as if on skis on my feet all the way down. Then I hike up the ascending tunnel and come out into the bright sun. I turn east toward the sun and hold my arms high and wide in a gesture of joy and appreciation. End of visualization. Notes: I try to do both of these rituals every day, but this is sometimes not possible. If I have an early appointment, on that day I simply take a shower and skip the ritual. Once in a while I will postpone the ritual and do it later in the day. I try to do the afternoon ritual every afternoon at about 3 p.m. This is more difficult to do every day than the morning ritual. If someone else is in the house, I sometimes find it difficult to do. At other times, I find myself wrapped up at getting a job done and forget to stop for it. Other times I feel like I don't have time to do it. Sometimes when I have not done the afternoon ritual, I try to do it at bedtime. In conjunction with the morning ritual, I usually do these things. Before the ritual, I do some self-affirmations in front of the bathroom mirror. Then I shave and brush my teeth. After the ritual, I usually do some other healing rituals. I may visualize my brain ordering my glands to send out good chemicals throughout my body to heal my disease. Often I drum for a few minutes and try to meditate during the drumming after the bath ritual. What the Pharaoh does for me. It is very difficult to put in words just how visualization with the Pharaoh affects me. I know that I feel better about myself when I do the rituals. When I am discouraged or depressed because of my therapy or disease, I neglect to do the rituals. When I do them, I feel better. I'm not sure which comes first. I do know that when I do the rituals, I feel better. I have self-esteem and somehow a reason for living, for continuing to fight my disease. Sometimes there is no specific thing I feel after meditating with the king. By this I mean I don't always feel like, wow, I really feel great immediately after meditating. More often it is just that I feel better in general over a period of time. I guess I'm trying to say it doesn't often happen instantly. By feeling better, I mean having a sense of well-being, fullness, a zest for life, self-esteem, those kind of things. Yet, there are times during the meditation when I definitely feel something spiritual. During a meditation, I may have a warm feeling about myself and about other people. I love others in a way that I've not loved before myself too, I suppose. If I talk to the Pharaoh about my family and children, for example, I experience a new feeling, a sense of love and appreciation for my children I have never felt before. I guess it is love. I know this feeling I have for my wife and children is new. It is not only happens during the meditation, but outside of it. I haven't felt this before. I'm sure some of the credit goes to the conversations and meditations with the Pharaoh. I've noticed that much of the time I have dry eyes. The tear glands don't seem to excrete enough tears. But when I am with the king in either of the rituals, my eyes are always moist. Sometimes they're even wet, as I sometimes move to tears. Sometimes when I am with the king, I feel a sense of fullness or belongingness or spirituality that I can't really describe. I suppose it is the sense of unity of all things that the mystics talk and write about. It doesn't happen often. I wish it would happen more often. Obviously, this man felt that he had benefited from this encounters with the inner king. He found strength to face his illness with courage and grace, and energy to seek and improve his relationships with his family. This in itself would have made his efforts an act of imagination and inner dialogue with the king worthwhile. However, in his case, as many in others, we find that an encounter with the king had an impact that reached beyond his private life. He began to express a new and deeper concern for others for his public responsibilities. He organized the first cancer group for men in our society, or in our city rather, making it possible for men to support each other in fighting their illness and giving attention to particular problems of men facing serious, life-threatening illness. He had hopes of providing leadership for others in forming and maintaining groups for seriously ill men. He was not, however, interested simply in illness-related topics. He became excited about the possibilities for leadership that exist for men and women in their 60s and older if they will accept the challenge of providing mature leadership for the building of a viable planetary human community. At the time of his death, he was working on an article for Modern Maturity magazine in which he had hoped to challenge the older men and women to assume once again their roles as human elders, meditating generativity for the human community. Those of us who had the privilege of knowing him were amazed at the power of the generative and nurturing life force that surrounded him in the last months and days of his life. Part of his radiance he brought to his family, friends, and city was no doubt the result of his face-to-face relationship with the loving king, whom he met in the king's chambers of his soul. Perhaps some of you who are reading this can carry forward Bill's vision. Active imagination as prayer, invoking the unconscious. Another active imagination technique, what religions call prayer, provides a number of techniques for establishing the axis mundi between the ego and the king. There are five techniques presented here, each of which generates the axis in a slightly different way. A prayer of petition is the kind most commonly used. It is the prayer the ego uses to ask the archetypes for help. At best, the prayer is spoken with the twofold dynamic of true humility, the recognition that our lives are dependent on a greater power than the ego, and the decision to get the help we need from that power. The ego asks the king for any qualities of courage, insight, endurance, patience, wisdom, clarity, or vision that it might need. The ego may also ask for a change of outer circumstances, the answer to an apparently insoluble problem, a sense of well-being through deliverance from a real outer world oppression, or any of a host of other things that could make for a greater fullness of being. A prayer of intercession is a kind of petition prayer the ego makes before the archetypes on behalf of an outer issue, other human beings, the natural world, or an important cause, for example. In the prayer of petition, the ego assumes its realistic size by approaching the archetype as its creature and servant, ready to receive whatever answer it is given, ready also to implement any answers it receives. The ego sincerely acknowledges the ultimate futility of its own devices and seeks the creative power only the archetype can supply. The ego's efforts and will are not enough. It needs a powerful ally. True humility invites an incarnational process by allowing the creative power of the king to manifest in the profane world through a man's own life. Once the petition is made, it is best if the ego closes the prayer with an attitude of faith that the archetype will respond in some way. The ego needs to put itself in the frame of mind to listen and watch for an answer. It has performed the focus imaging of a particularly good it desires and conveyed that image to the unconscious. Via the imagination, the unconscious will respond. Since archetypes usually speak in images and symbols, it is important that the ego be prepared to interpret its answers in these terms. Many of these symbolic responses will be conveyed to the ego in dreams. Learning to interpret dreams in a manner the ego can comprehend becomes vitally important to the man seeking to access the archetypal king. A very readable introduction to Jungian dream interpretation is one written by analyst John Sanford, Dreams, God's Forgotten Language. There is a wealth of other literature in the field well worth looking into. The unconscious may speak to us through waking visions, daydreams, spontaneous thoughts, or insights that pop into our heads. Also, the unconscious may communicate through what Young called synchronistic events. By this he meant events that seem to have no causal connection with each other, but which cluster together at certain times of crisis or searching in our lives, and which often point to a particular theme or issue we need to address. A man who had sought counseling, which act is in itself a kind of prayer of petition, after separating from his wife, asked his counselor whether he should bury the relationship or try to revive it. After mirroring the man's concern, his counselor suggested he continue to weigh his decision, holding the opposite possibilities in tension until the unconscious had an opportunity to respond. Several mornings later, his car was stopped at an intersection by a funeral procession. He drove on, not thinking much of it. A few blocks farther on, he had to stop for another funeral procession. This time he thought, 2 in one day? That's weird. On his way home that evening, he was held by a third procession. As he was waiting for it to pass, like a bolt from the blue, the thought came to the man that his relationship with his wife was really dead. Then he realized the 3 funeral processions, acausally connected with his particular dilemma, might have been steering him to his problem solution. The prayer petition, followed by his eyes, ears, and mind open to the answer, allows the higher will of the true psychological center to guide us through our troubles. In serving the king, a man creates a little more order within himself. Each time he realizes a little more inner structure in his struggles to solve the dilemmas of daily life. He moves to the world of created world forward. A prayer of confession is the ego's spontaneous response to the immediate overwhelming power of the archetype. In the presence of the fully realized king, the ego feels profoundly unworthy, not guilty or ashamed, but realistically lacking. With no sense of humiliation, the ego confesses its mistakes and submits to the power upon whose wisdom, strength, courage, and life force it depends. The prayer of confession is through which the ego can experience its necessary deflation. This prayer prepares the ego for a more authentic embracing of the life tasks the masculine self demands it should accept. In this sense, the prayer of confession constellates more than any other the ego archetypal axis, opening the ego to a sense of gratitude and realistic greatness. The prayer of thanksgiving expresses the ego's gratitude for the good it already has. An attitude of deeply felt, exuberant appreciation is the opposite of grandiosity. When we are grandiose, we feel we owe nothing to anyone, that everything we have achieved has been owed to us. We do not celebrate the act of grace real goodness is. We pass over it as something of no great importance, something almost worthless. Far more interesting to us are the things we do not have, but we feel we deserve. These are our obsessive focus. The prayer of thanksgiving puts us in a proper relationship with the king. If we are caught in his shadow system, we feel nothing we have is good enough for us. The weakling is a chronic complainer, always feeling he has been shortchanged. The tyrant believes he is to do everything on his own. Neither of these shadow kings realizes goodness is never owned and can never be assumed. The king has a superabundance of libido and goodness, and the unconscious showers us with blessings when we prepare our minds to receive them. Gratitude and thanksgiving prepare our state of mind. By its prayer of praise and worship, the ego puts itself in a position subordinate to the archetype. It praises the king in realizing he is the source of all life and all blessing. In the prayer of praise and worship, the ego spontaneously expresses its joy and unrestricted admiration for the king. The capacity to admire and praise others is the hallmark of mature psychological structures. A consolidated sense of self is full enough that it can overflow and touch others with its radiance. In the prayer of dialogue, the ego-king axis is constellated by verbal interaction between the differentiated accessing ego and the archetype. Although the unconscious uses largely the language of symbols, there are times when the archetypal energy is so charged and the conscious attitude so receptive that the ego can hear the voice of the king. The words that reach the ego are often oracular, cryptic, and mysterious. Yet this fifth form of prayer can be an important means of actively interacting with the archetype. The best way to begin such a dialogue is with pen and paper. A man seeking this kind of communication needs to find a quiet time and place to clear his mind and to wait patiently whatever the unconscious has to say. It can help him to write a sort of letter to the archetype, asking questions, inviting responses. After writing a page or two, often quite suddenly the man may hear an inner voice responding to him. Frequently he finds himself writing so quickly he feels as if he were taking dictation. It is of the most importance that he not censor anything that is communicated. He should write it down exactly as it comes. Some voices that comes to us may seem hostile or persecuting. Then the question religions speak of as discernment of spirit arises. Hindu and Buddhist traditions warn of illusory demons which suddenly appear when the person seeking enlightenment steps over his inner threshold. Common sense should lead us to ask ourselves whether the voices have any legitimate criticisms to offer us, or if instead they seem bent on destroying our sense of well-being. Some of the entities encountered in dialogue prayers may simply be parental or sibling interjects, or the internalized voice of our therapist, or even what Freud called our superego. The dangers inherent in turning inward are manageable with common sense and discretion. If a voice turns hostile, end the session. If inner persecutors are encountered on a regular basis, it's probably wise to consult a counselor, psychotherapist, analyst, or some other professional familiar with such phenomena. But the man who can discern the voice of the king, and you will know it when you hear it, will earn plentiful rewards. You will be guided by the king's wisdom, supported by his blessing, strengthened by his protective might, and enlivened by his procreative force. You will enact for yourself a royal audience in which the king and your ego are made real to each other. You should write as long as the energy is flowing. When it begins to ebb, you simply when it begins to ebb, you simply end the session. But afterward, take careful steps to remember what is you did to gain access to your king. That way you will know how to call on the king again in the future. As if, getting into the consciousness of the king. There is another active imagination exercise we can try when other means of access fail us. We can act as if some situation were true and proceed from there. This is a method actors use as a technique for getting into character. When the imagination fails and the character just will not come, an actor behaves as if he were the character. He comes at the role from the outside rather than from the inside. The as-if technique is an effective ruse to employ to invoke the unconscious, which often supplies the actor with the material he would never have come across consciously. Often an actor's trouble with a role stems from the inaccessibility of repressed but pertinent personal experience, and behaving as if gives the unconscious the opportunity to supply the information. Among the ways an actor begins to behave as if he is another person is by adopting a certain walk, a vocal habit, or a verbal pattern characteristic of the role. He tries it out on his own body and experiments with how the new habits make him feel. He is a very conscious and questioning technique. But his goal is to get himself past the stuck place to where he can genuinely inhabit his role. He evokes, literally calls out, the character from his unconscious. We are having trouble imagining the king within us. We may need to involve him by behaving as if we were already vested with our own kingship. The approach may seem shallow at first. Indeed, acting against our feelings can reinforce a false persona when that way of acting becomes a substitute for authentic feelings. If we continue a false persona over time, we may elicit a variety of personality disorders. But there is no danger in using the technique almost like a game or an experiment to see how behaving like a king might feel. If we are becoming unglued and we hear our voices rising with anxiety and tension, we can remind ourselves to take a deep breath, slow down, and consciously lower our voices. By speaking calmly and carefully, we soon recover control. We may feel the ego king axis materialize within us. We can imagine the axis mundi rising through our spines, or picture ourselves as the world tree, our roots deep in the earth. our topmost branches reaching to the clouds. When we begin to feel the rage take us over, we can catch ourselves clenching our fists, cramping the muscles in our necks. We can then imagine ourselves growing steady and quiet, taking our king's place at the center of the situation. A strange thing may happen. As we take control of ourselves, the external situation will become calmer as well. If you are calm in a crisis, others will take their cue from you. By acting as if you are the king, you can manage to do a little world building too. A young man was once sitting at the bar in one of his favorite restaurants. It was happy hour and a lot of people were getting loaded. An obviously drunk man behind him suddenly dropped his glass on the floor. The drunk challenged the young man, saying, "Hey, you son of a bitch, you knocked that drink out of my hand." The young man felt a rush of fear and anger. The frightened bartender looked around helplessly, and some of the bystanders began to form an eager circle to watch the coming fight. The young man resisted, getting hooked by the aggressor's need to prove himself, found his center, assessed his oppositions. He gave his actor a blank stare, acting as if he were in control of the situation. He got up from his stool, calmly paid for his drink, and walked deliberately out the door. The nonplussed drunk did not follow, because he had centered himself. The young man was able to coolly take charge, control his fear and anger, and de-escalate the drunk's hostility. He had evoked divine order in potentially destructive circumstances. The king was embodied in him, and creative order held chaos in check. Finally, getting in the mind of the king and seeking to think and feel as if one is the true king is a technique that can have many far-reaching implications in addition to the more personal and private ones noted above. One of the exercises we have used in many workshops for men on kingship issues is that of imagining oneself the king who has just returned from a far country to a city, who now walks the streets in disguise to take stock of the condition of his people during his absence. This exercise one seeks to look with the king's eye, hear with his ears, and feel with his heart. In a workshop setting, one can take an imaginal walk through one's city or other places in one's realm. An even more powerful experience can be had in actually observing conditions in our cities, our forests, or our rivers while practicing putting on the consciousness of the king. Men who have done these exercises report that they find themselves not only able to stop denying the enormous public social needs that challenge us, but that instead of being overwhelmed, they feel an influx of the power and determination to respond to them in a provocative way. Emulation, admiring men. It is of vital importance that a man access the mature masculine archetypes through other men. While historical figures provide an inner sense of what maturity is like, these men cannot be intimately known. They cannot be held. They cannot be smelled. We will never be able to look into their eyes. Biographies and histories make for useful reading and do give us imaginal examples to emulate, but there is no adequate substitute for bonding with living men. Male bonding is a familiar idea in our culture. It is a nearly universal behavioral pattern found in the vast majority of cultures in all historical epochs. Primate instinct may account for male clustering, where chimpanzees bond in the same way as men. Anthropologists theorize that male bonding occurs in order to further socialite societal goals of communal protection and provisioning. Psychologists speculate that men also need the company of other men to reinforce their male identity against the regressive infantile impulse. Manhood is in part an artificial societal construct, while arising in the structures of the masculine brain as a natural genetic and hormonal endowment. The cultural expressions of manhood must be reinforced in order to keep men from regression into sexless infantilism. It takes work to become a man. Achieving the adult male status requires personal courage and the support of nurturing of older men. In many traditional societies, the older man's function was to initiate young men into the mysteries of life, work, responsibility, marriage, and masculinity. Lacking these culturally sanctioned and ritualized avenues of contact, modern men often fell back on less serious forms of male bonding. Not that there is anything wrong in getting loaded with the boys, but ultimately something more is needed. Men need to bond with other men they can genuinely admire. Man does not have to be perfect to merit our admiration. No man is perfect. but many are admirable. We especially need to be able to admire men who show qualities of character we feel we lack. Artists need to admire warriors and love them for the ways they express their masculinity. Warriors need to love and admire artists for the same reason. CEOs need to bond with the warehouse and assembly line workers who earn their livings by their sweat of their brows, and the youth workers need to bond with the magicians and the kings the CEOs are trying to become. We need to admire our friends for their strengths we may not possess. We need to love them in their weakness, for we know weakness too. We need to seek out men who consciously who are not in touch with their mature masculine archetypes. Even the pure emotional act of admiring other men supports our own maturity, our sense of security and worth. If we can all absorb archetypal, personal aspects of manhood from each other's, we will help each other become generative men. We will help each other embody the archetypal structures of authentic masculinity. Once we are proficient with our active imagination skills and we have some familiarity with our inner terrain, once we have sought out and bonded with other men, we will be able to call upon archetypal energies at any time and at any place. If things break down at the construction site, communication goes awry at an important meeting, if the hotel accommodations for the overnight business trip are a bust, if the wife is suffering an emotional crisis and the kids are into something they shouldn't be, we will be able to find our center, constellate the axis mundi, call our inner king, and even against enormous odds, make a world where before only chaos and destruction had reigned.
Chapter 10. Dancing the Four Quarters. The challenge of masculine wholeness. By accident or design, the director of the film, David, the King, represents the title character engaged in one of the fundamental acts of sacred kingship, dancing the four quarters. Beyond the simple pleasure to be had watching actor Richard Gere's sincere, if unsuccessful, effort to dance, the film offers a valuable visual reference for a rarely noted aspect of king energy. King David is shown dancing into Jerusalem after his predecessor dies. Taking the crown is for him a joyous, anticipated event. He shows no hesitancy at all about assuming his royal responsibilities. Of necessity, we have focused in many of our chapters on what can go wrong with king energy. We have also provided the profile of an ideal generative man in order to make sure the man who needs one has a specific image of what maturity can be. But what happens after the king energy is there in the psyche, and the three other foundational archetypes are generatively embodied as well. If the king is the center of the world, and he is responsible for a kingdom stretching impossibly far away from him in every direction, what is he to do to fulfill his responsibilities? The answer is that he begins to dance the four quarters. This is why the image of King David dancing is so important. His playful dance has a serious intent. By dancing, he keeps the world created. Some scholars believe King David underlies the Hebrew image of God. The Christian teaching, at least, is that he is Christ's ancestor. Jesus is called in some traditions a Lord of the Dance, and in this circumstance he is parallel to the Indian god Shiva. The dance here is a metaphor for the chaotic, actively shifting universe along with the emergence of creative order, which the archetypal king engenders. Shiva does his dance right on the verge between chaos and creation. His dance makes the world and unmakes parts of it as well. Anyone who has seen a traditional Indian image of Shiva, one leg and four arms raised and variously moving, will attest to the striking serenity of Shiva's countenance at the center of the image, still in the midst of the swirling motion. By dancing the four quarters one after the other, the king keeps them created and infused with sacred energy. This demands a certain ceaseless activity. The king must not stop in his progress through the world, because if he stops, the world stops with him. How can a man seeking to access the archetype manage this uninterrupted movement? One answer some men accepted is to scurry around, expending a tremendous amount of frenetic energy in a tense, frightened attempt to keep things from grinding to a halt.
The assumption behind this answer is that disaster is looming, and everything needs to be done quickly to stave it off. But because a disaster is expected, it comes, and it comes as often as not, like an unwelcome relative, whenever it wants. The better answer is to dance the four quarters. The answer assumes change is the engine of life, and the best thing you can do for yourself is to hitch yourself up to that engine and go for a ride. You can have the serenity of Shiva if you're changing exactly as fast as the rest of the world, for then it takes no effort to move at all. With a light, careful step, you can visit every district of your world, gracefully moving quarter to quarter. You regenerate the world even as you move through it with elegance and pleasure. There is no wasted, nervous effort to this dance. There was a time in our country when these dances were performed as a matter of course. Black Elk Speaks is the life story of a Sioux holy man, as told to a white poet he met. Here he describes the preparations his tribe made for a dance done in honor of one of his pivotal visions. A sacred teepee was built and decorated at the center of a circular camp. On the west side they painted a bow and a cup of water. On the north, white geese and the herb. On the east, the daybreak star and the pipe. On the south, the flowering stick and the nation's hoop. Also, they painted horses, elk, and bison. Then, over the door of the sacred teepee, they painted the flaming rainbow. It took them all day to do this, and it was beautiful. The dance took place around the tent, with specific events taking place in particular quadrants marked out in the circular space. Afterward is what had happened inside the teepee they had danced around. Then we began going into the teepee to see what might have happened there while we were dancing. The grandfathers had sprinkled fresh oil on the nation's hoop that they had made in there, with the red and black roads across it, and all around this little circle of the nation's hoop we saw the prints of tiny pony hoofs, as though the spirit horses had been dancing while we danced. It's hard to read such a passage without experiencing a sense of loss. Like Vietnam, the massacres of the Native American nations are an unmourned national tragedy. This is perhaps one reason why so many men have been moved and encouraged by the film Dances with Wolves. We have lost much of the Indian lore, but many of the records we do have, like Black Elk Speaks, are truly remarkable. Joseph Campbell said a perceptive thing to Bill Moyers during his popular series of television interviews. He said that once we saw the first image of our Earth taken from a camera on a spaceship, we were given the chance to start a world mythology. There is no plainer image to be had of the one world we all have to share. The Gaia movement had taken some steps to found this new planetary myth. But we can go further. We have the opportunity, for the first time in human history, to offer a truly global initiation to our younger generations. Tribe by tribe, people have always felt they have done this, but they have been limited by tribal concerns. But the opportunity has presented itself to us. With all the knowledge we possess with comparative mythology and the human need for initiation, to begin initiating new generations into a nurturing myth that makes a real effort to care for the world. If we do not take advantage of this opportunity, it will be because of our pathological denial of the problems facing our world today. We should all aim to dance the four quarters. The king, who is Lord of the four quarters, is the leader, too, of the four foundational structures of the psyche. When he is dancing, he is accessing himself and the warrior, magician, and lover in a balanced and generative way. He is balancing the four into one generative unity, and he accomplishes the balance playfully. The psyche that has reached the stage of maturity can't help but take pleasure in itself, in all the things of creation. Inner work is fundamentally important to an individual's capacity for pleasure. If our feelings are deadened by unresolved issues, there may be very few things in the world for us to take pleasure in. We shouldn't lose sight of the pleasure available to us once we have worked through the shadow material that frustrates our progress. Erickson's generative man has a deep capacity for play. Another word for adult play is recreation, something we have associated with the king all along. When a child plays, he may be trying out a sense of an integrated ego, or rehearsing for personal mastery, succeeding in the limited world of the game, an important compensation for a life in the outside world in which he is not a master. Erikson felt there was no great difference between the play of adults and children, though, as Browning notes, quote, "the adult's play is recreation, whereas the child's is preparation." Close quote. Here are Browning's reflections on some of the phenomena of adult play. All through Erikson's work is the implication that the creative adult, the generative adult, is precisely the person who can infuse his life with play. The great cultural synthesizers, the religious, political, and cultural geniuses such as Luther, Freud, and Gandhi, were supreme in their playfulness, especially in their work. Their great works of synthesis were personal attempts to restore the active mastery of their egos in the context of the tensions and dichotomies of their personal and public historical situations. All great historical syntheses are as much play as they are work. They are work because they are indeed attentive to the real contradictions and tensions that most people of a given historical period both sense and suffer. They are a result of play because the creative genius does not simply conform to, adjust to, and accommodate to these tensions. Instead, he bends and reshapes these tensions until they submit to a new synthesis, which not only enlivens and activates him, but which also enlivens and activates a whole people and an entire era. The kind of synthesis Browning is talking about is the healing structure. Luther offered a corrective to the corrupt Catholicism of his era, and it was popular because so many people hungered for one. Freud looked into forbidden topics, and Europeans responded because they had secretly been longing to explore the same oppressive taboos themselves. Gandhi synthesized antipathies of his countrymen into a useful and creative means of protest, and won India away from the British Empire as a result. Both synthesis and heal are words that mean to make something whole. The synthesis we would like to communicate to men today is how to make the quadrated psyche whole. It is not enough to develop only one or two of the archetypes. We need all four of them in our lives, because once they are activated in our souls, we can make a real difference in our society at large. We cannot solve our national problems with men who have no warrior, men who have nothing but the warrior to guide them. We need that aggressive energy to attack and sustain us in our battles against our social ills, but we need it, steward it, and integrate it in functioning along with other energies. As this book has made plain, we need the energies of the king to put our world in order and to fuel our caring, nurturing efforts in our efforts to bestow constitutive blessings upon people. When we develop our magician, we give ourselves the gift of seeing through fundamentalisms that fragment our best organizations, leaving them incoherent and purposeless. And with the lover beside us, we'll give our emotions free rein to guide us. Emotions are often wiser than our egos would like to think. They stem from a deeper level of consciousness, and they have much to tell us. The lover also ensures our joyful embodiment so that we can enjoy ourselves and gather the necessary rewards for what we do. It is not enough, though, to make peace with your shadow material and explore your anima, and start down the path to being a generative man. If you do this, you are doing a lot already, much more than so many men have done in our society. But we cannot stop at this. Depth psychology has been a thread in this country's social fabric for more than a generation now, and a significant number of the best and the brightest have been through a course of one kind of therapy or another. And what do we have to show for it? There is more shadow material abroad in our country than ever. What are we to do about it? Men who have made it through drug and alcohol recovery programs have done courageous work, and we are all indebted to them for it, for we are all aspects of one another, and when a man brings order back to his life, He increases the stock of order at large in the world for all of us to draw on. But we cannot settle for this. Recovery for what? We finally have to ask ourselves, maturation to what end? There is a tradition within at least two of the major religions in this country, American Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, of emphasis only on salvation of the individual. Once that happens, then what? Often very little. Frequently, churches are not set up with the vision to provide anything more. The same problem faces therapists. Once an analyzan has completed a course of treatment, what can they be encouraged to do afterward? We need to recognize that therapy, recovery, or conversion isn't enough. As a man gets personally stronger, he must find things that will relate him back to the world. He needs to take responsibility for making changes in the world, and not only in himself, because once you consider the state our society is in, you must recognize that we have no choice. Know thy less, by all means, try to get that far. And know that once you are on the way with this work, there is even more satisfying work to come. Kingship as stewardship and servant leadership. A friend of ours told of an incident reported in the local Washington papers. Apparently a wild stag walked up to the front gate of the White House. There he hooked his horns in the iron of the gate and twisted his head until he broke off his rack. He left it hanging there on the White House gate and walked around the streets of Washington for several hours afterward in a catatonic daze. Finally, some National Park Service employees caught the stag and took him away to the woods. This is another example of a Jungian synchronistic event. There we go. One of the most searching of tasks facing the men of our culture involves conserving and stewarding the ecological resources of our planet. The stag couldn't consciously have picked a better place to make his unconscious protest. It might have meant something too, if only our president had been listening. Generativity means primarily a concern for the future. There are degrees to generativity. You can be generative in providing for your own children without going much farther afield than that. Or you can be a generative civic leader, concerned for your community, or a generative prophet who makes the world at large his concern. There is a tradition in our country of emphasis on the individual. No doubt this has made for some of the more spectacular events in our history, but it is time we started to move away from being concerned only for the individual and move toward a more encompassing concern. The world is currently crying out for our help. There are dozens of things a man can do to help, from organizing his family's recycling habits to joining with a group in the community to clean and care for the parks to working on a national or international scale with groups like Greenpeace. The kind of male bonding that is occurring spontaneously in various places across the country strikes us as being the ideal ground for building new environmental, social justice concerns groups where none existed previously due to the work that a community notices needs doing. This is why we see this kind of male bonding as a very positive thing. Some people think that when men get together in emotionally connected groups, Nazism isn't far away. We think that it is the shadow side of male bonding these people are afraid of, and it comes from men who are not in touch with their king. So the obvious solution to the problems is to help get them in touch with their king. That doesn't mean the best approach is to discourage male aggressive behaviors. Male warrior energy is an excellent incitement to getting things done, particularly when it is in the service of the king. There's a marvelous sense of magnificence to some of the servant warriors of the past. The Knights Templars shouted to each other, "Be glorious," on their way into battle. And around the world in America, the Lakota had a cry in a similar spirit. Black Elk, this is the kind of day in which to do something great. If we can hold on to that kind of inspiration for settling the conflicts of our lives without losing our king's perspective of purposeful caring, we will make a difference in our world. It can be more important to make a difference than to make a mark. Cooperation groups will accomplish more than a group with a chaos of leaders. We have no wish to shame men into world-building work. The impetus has come from within. We do believe shame shouldn't be universally despised mechanism it has become today. Most often a man is taught to feel ashamed of his gifts, and this is an unhealthy, dysfunctional shaming. If we were to meet a true saint, you would feel what John Bradshaw calls healthy shame. Call it humility in this situation if you prefer. Humility is instructive. It is what our ego feels when it recognizes how much more it could be doing. If it doesn't make sense for you in your life to join an environmentalist group or found your own, consider what you can do in the human groups around you. There are hundreds of groups already in place to help men help others. Think of the Boy Scouts, Big Brothers, Junior Achievement, the 4-H clubs. All these groups are available to the man who wishes to sponsor the younger generation. The efforts of these organizations are largely unsung, and we are indebted to them. Or think of the similarly unsung groups engaged in urban renewal, the NAACP or the men's clubs that do such a variety of good works. The Rotary Club, the Masons, the Kiwanis, the Lions, the Knights of the Columbus, the Elks. If we missed in naming any groups, it is only because our list is informal, designed to spur men into seeing what kinds of organizations are already in place and waiting for them to get involved in civic regeneration. You don't necessarily have to look any farther than your job. What can you do for the young men you work with? Are there any men that you find yourself drawn to that you might be able to encourage and mentor in their work? Or are there older men with gifts they are waiting to pass on that no man has seen fit to ask for? Of course, if you are an executive, this should be a part of your job description already. If you are an executive and you're not making the people who work for you feel magical, you're not doing your job. This is a context in which shame has no place. The days in which the view, if I really ride them, they'll work harder, could be sanctioned are no longer with us. You must empower your workers to do their work, and that means you must be drawing empowerment from your king energy yourself. This one arena in which men have a lesson to learn from the women's movement. Because of the empowering spirit of the movement, women have been getting together and forming spontaneous groups to fight the social problems they identify. Many of these groups don't even consider themselves feminists, though they've drawn support and encouragement from the feminist example. We're thinking of the anti-drug traffic groups women are forming in inner-city neighborhoods, groups too on a national scale like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. The first group in years in Ireland to have an impact on the violence in that society was a group of ordinary housewives who found their common cause. If individuation is as Jung sees it, it is a moral struggle that brings some cosmic healing into the world. It occurs to us that the ultimate purpose of this healing may be to bring the king and queen back together in a common cause. It's as if Zeus and Hera need some marriage counseling, and that is the task before our culture now. Not many of us can imagine men and women living together peacefully, and that isn't only because of tyrant or weakling kings. There are plenty of queens out there who are not looking to cooperate. They are looking for consorts, yes, but it is time for both sexes to find their common ground. A brief history of humanity can be seen to support the notion that the two sexes need to come together now in a mutually balanced dynamic. If women powered the prehistoric shift from a nomadic to an agricultural way of life, and from the fertility objects and mother goddess religions of the agrarian communities, this is what may have happened, and men have largely powered the shift of the last several thousand years into city life and technological mastery, which has been taken to such an extreme that many now feel the need to redress the balance. Then it would stand to reason that we are facing now is the necessity of bringing these two separate energies into harmonious cooperation for a new shift into the future. We have developed each energy to a high level in our human history. Our time could witness the exciting spectacle of what the two energies can accomplish together. Robert Greenleaf was a highly principled Quaker and a management theorist who spent the last 20 years of his life changing the way leaders worked with people. A mentoring college professor wished aloud in class one day for a man who could work from inside the institutions that serve us to change them around until they really would serve us. And Greenleaf decided to do exactly that. He worked for 38 years with AT&T, rising from the ranks of the telephone lineman to an executive position. For the last 20 of those years, he planned the work he was to do after retirement, and he found the second career to be the most rewarding period of his life. He consulted for companies, churches, and foundations, making sure they reoriented themselves to the people they served. He helped many colleges through the turbulence they faced in the 60s, and it was in this context that he worked out the metaphors of the theories he has passed along to us. He noticed the shelves of the college bookstores were filled at the time with the works of Hermann Hesse. Always open to new ideas, he picked up some of these works to see what attractions they held for the students. One story in particular, Journey to the East, resonated with ideas he had held since childhood. In the story, a group of men undertake a pilgrimage. They take with them a servant, Leo, who performs for them all their menial tasks, but somehow also eases the journey along by his entertaining spirit and his songs. One day Leo is missing, and not long after the pilgrims grow fractious, and the pilgrimage itself loses focus and is abandoned. Years later, the narrator, one of the original pilgrims, runs into Leo, who invites him to a meeting of the order that had originally sponsored the journey. Once at the meeting, he discovers Leo is in fact the titular head of the order. He met a noble leader, and he'd taken at first to be a servant. The theme of the story was simple for Greenleaf, that the leader led simply and naturally because he first appeared to the pilgrims as their servant. He wrote his first essay, The Servant as Leader, around this theme. For example, rather than blame the students for their irresponsible rebelliousness, he took a long hard look at why their collegiate institutions were doing little to serve them. His conclusion was that most colleges had lost sight of what it was they were set up to do. They no longer attempted to serve the student body. Perhaps because of the sense of limitlessness, the first European settlers felt that they began their lives here. We have a problem with scale in America. If an organization is successful, our immediate instinct is to make it bigger before we give it a vision. And as Proverbs 29:18 reminds us, quote, where there is no vision, the people perish, close quote. Greenleaf believed that big institutions had the capacity to be creative and nurturing. He had seen in his experience some that were, but he found the movement into caring began always with a single person, who served as a servant leader. Often these leaders' legacy included a division of the larger institution into smaller communities, because people seem to work better in these smaller groups. The idea of the leader as servant is in accord with most of our practical experience in dealing with people, although it is at odds with some things we are often told. We are told to get respect, we have to demand it, but the demanding tyrant is respected by no one. The easiest way to gain someone's respect is to first respect him. We are perceptive beings, and our co-workers know our faults as intimately as we know theirs. The tyrant may feel he has no intimidated people, so they will have no opportunity to notice his flaws. Here is one manager's experience with the opposite approach. After having taken over a tyrant's dictatorship position, I felt I couldn't help the staff if I didn't know what their problems were. But they were not about to share with one who never makes a mistake. I began the practice of starting the weekly staff meeting by disclosing my 2 dumbest mistakes of the previous week. At first there was shock, but then people began to share, and I was able to resolve a lot of things that would have been swept under the rug. When I've told the story at management development conferences, I've had some weak-egoed managers confront me with the question of whether this practice didn't lessen the staff's respect for me. On the contrary, they respected my humanness, open communication, and willingness to work with them to solve problems. In order to lead others, a man must be willing to lead himself into unfamiliar territory as well. Change is based on influence, and influence is a mutual process. If you are helping someone, make sure to find a way to help that teaches you something as well. That way, as you develop his best potentials, you develop your own, and both parties are mutually empowered. This first skill the servant leader must learn is to listen. Once he can listen, he must be able to accept what he hears. This means he cannot scold, chide, or kill the messenger. The servant leader must articulate a vision that his people can support. If he doesn't credit his people for letting him know their feelings, and if he doesn't let those feelings influence the vision, they will never support his vision. They will feel alienated from the visionary process, and to their minds, the vision will remain his. Once a mutually inspired vision is articulated and implemented, Robert Greenleaf believed the servant leader had then to ask some pretty tough questions. Do those being served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? What a stupid question. And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will she or he benefit, or at least not be further deprived? To this he added one further stipulation. No one will be knowingly hurt by the action, directly or indirectly. This injunction is perhaps the most difficult to uphold, and also the most important. Greenleaf believes in persuasion over coercion. Although it takes more time to persuade a man of something, he generally will stay persuaded. If he believes his leader's path is true, he will follow to the ends of the earth. On the other hand, if he has been coerced, he will abandon the fold at the first opportunity. It is the leader's duty to maintain the truth and scope of his vision. Return to the image of the dance. If the leader does not set a cooperative rhythm, whether he is dancing with a group or a single partner, then the dance will be one nobody enjoys or profits from. Our most familiar model for the servant king is probably Jesus of Nazareth, the Good Shepherd. Though he chose 12 very plain men for his followers, he made sure to spend his time and energies among them, sharing meals, traveling, and planning with them. In return, after a growing comprehension and commitment to his vision, they internalized it as their own and spread it after his death across the known world. In Matthew 20:26-28, Jesus is absolutely clear about the purposes behind his practice, telling his apostles, quote, "Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to live his life as a ransom for many." Close quote. As servant kings to our communities, we may not be called upon to give our lives, but surely we are challenged to dedicate them in service. Afterward, the return of the true king. Consciously or not, men have always been in touch with the archetypal king, whether as push of the instinctual primate, the protecting, providing, procreating alpha male, enforcing law and order in a society of chaotic emotion, or as the sacred king in the pyramid summit temple, communing in trance with his ancestral gods. The king has always driven us from the unconscious depths of our animality and lured us from the high heavens of the imagination with the visions of transcendent wholeness. Perhaps more often than not, we feel ourselves swinging like a pendulum between the poles of his shadow form. We may lack the ego structure or the maturity we need to accommodate him. Perhaps, like a giant oblivious to his own strength, he crushes us as he gathers us in his arms. Perhaps he is himself so charged with energy, he finds it impossible to see our undeveloped images. Once we acquire authentic selves, perhaps we will be better able to behold us. When we consolidate our personality, the king can enter in a healthy incarnational relationship with us. Together we can constellate the axis mundi. Along it we can pass his sacred energy into the created world. The king may need us to become fully himself. In concert with an ego, the king can materialize the center in which the eternal dialectics of tyrant and weakling, of light and darkness, life and death, masculine and feminine, inner and outer, can reconcile and resolve into a transcendent third. The king can make of a willing ego a transformer filled to the brim with concentrated divine energy, rendering this energy useful to everyone. Through an imaginative, playful ego, the king derives the procreator in a man, infusing the world with creative libido. To a humble ego, the king manifests as a structure, bringing human affairs into harmony with the mythic music of the universe. As often as it seems, the high civilization is out of step with the cosmic right order. It must be remembered that any civilization arises from the natural order and cannot be totally estranged from it. If the Tao appears to have been violated, it is because we misunderstand the Tao. Nothing that occurs in nature is unnatural. Still, things work out better for us as individuals when we embrace a conscious attitude of cooperation with the universe. When we try to bring repressed material back into consciousness, we are bringing our individual consciousness back in tune with the world's Dharma. We are accepting the world-building challenge brought by the archetypal king and proving our worth as individuals. Our present world situation is in desperate need of men willing to call up the sacred king in themselves. We are dangerously divided against each other. This may always have been true of human societies, but the possible consequences of divisions are today more serious than ever. We are in need of a visionary, realizable center. We need a structure to bring in order to human affairs preferable to today's law of the jungle. Confronted by infantile displays of mismanaged libido, we need the example of a transformer to teach us the way to contain and focus our energies. With a mature procreator, we might finally address the crises rooted in the brutalized childhood so many of us share. We can break the chain of brutality that is otherwise passed on to each new generation, to international politics, and to our disregarded ecosystem. Now as never before, we need to access the dynamic masculine-feminine archetypal structures to fight the powers of infantilism and evil that threaten our world. We need to build worlds as far into the future as our imaginations can carry us. The Creator's world of truth comes to us along the axis mundi. From the deep unconscious, the silent word of truth has found expression in every sacred king who ever worked to raise his people's consciousness, to expand the boundaries of civilization and to make order out of chaos. Not only can individual men not be men without vital connection with the king encoded within them, but also if the men of earth do not form a living bond with their archetypal roots, all the world-making adventures through which the life force stretches toward a richer and more authentic way of being human will elude us. From his centered position between the planes of reality, sacred and profane, the mortal man who grasps the scepter offered to him by his own deep psyche can dream dreams and act to make them come true. The king is on his throne within you, at the central point in you, where worlds explode and contain thunder and flash of flower into being from out of your mind, your soul, your words, and your deeds. The man who built the second pyramid at Giza, Sephron, had himself sculpted in stone. Seated on the throne of Egypt, his head, sight of the mind of God in human form, is protected by the enfolding hawk wings of Horus. Sephron's eyes are calm, direct, unafraid to behold whatever is before him. In this world and the next, his lips hold the same mysterious smile seen on the enlightened Zeuses and Buddhas from Spain to Java, the smile of the deep joy of Gnosis. His body is upright, alert, but not tense. He is relaxed and concentrated, ready for any necessary action. His feet are grounded on the primordial hill. In his right hand, resting on his thigh, he holds the phallic scepter. His left hand is left open on his knee, palm downward, in an attitude of benediction. This sculpture is an image of the benevolence and might, of an offering of life, of a declaration of authority. We began this book by calling attention to the ancient and widespread longing of our species for the return of a liberating and life-enhancing king, a longing that is echoed throughout the mythology of many cultures. We have argued in this book that this longing is not just an infantile fantasy in response to our feelings of hopelessness and helplessness in a chaotic world. Rather, we are convinced that this ancient imago within us is an image of the biologically encoded potentials for generativity and inclusion nurture, which are a part of the evolutionary potential within every man. Masculinity is not in its essence abusive. We have within us the innate potential to use our masculine power for blessing, stewardship, and servant leadership. Our ancient longings may yet be fulfilled, not through one messianic person, but through an inner revolution in the maturation of masculine consciousness in which millions of men may participate. You can be a part in this revolution in masculine consciousness, in the return of the true king. He is within you, waiting for you to welcome him into your life and to bring his vision to your family, your community, and planet Earth. If we each do our part, perhaps we will soon join men and women from other races, cultures, and creeds at an inner round table and begin to plan the great public struggle which could lead to the real Camelot, a world community of shalom, of peace with justice.